What's up guys, it's me Jeremy, and it's about time that I finally update the list for the skins that buff your champion. My first video is now super outdated, and I know I made a lot of mistakes in making it, so it's definitely worth updating the list. And before you get skeptical and say that it's impossible for a skin to buff your champion, note that the buff that you get from these skins is extremely small and only has a really small impact on the gameplay. But I do think that the impact on the gameplay is definitely still there, and I'll go over why for each skin, so please approach this video with an open mind. Also, keep in mind that we will only be looking at skins currently available for purchase in the store, and I did my best to research every single available skin, but there's so many skins that it's very likely that I may have missed some, so please forgive me if I do. It's also worth noting that a reasonable amount of these skins are banned from LCS because they impact the viewing experience quite significantly as a result from what makes them buff your champion. Anyways, we have a ton of skins to get through, which I've categorized into 5 different groups based on the specific way that they buff your champion. Let's get started. The first group is skins that have particles that are harder to see, usually due to a change in color to something that's a little bit harder to see like the color yellow, or to make them a lot dimmer, as well as skins that change the shape of the ability and overall make their skill shots reasonably harder to dodge since the particles are harder to see and react to. The skins that do this are as follows. Blitzcrank, who has a significantly harder to see rocket grab due to having a really weird animation as well as a different color on the ability. Steel Legion Lux, whose binding and E are significantly harder to see due to having a different shape as well as having similar shapes to her auto attack. Justicar Syndra, who has a lot lighter particle effects, and so all of her skills are fairly difficult to see, especially if you're colorblind. Arclight Varus, who has harder to see skill shots due to them being a lot lighter, which makes them a lot less vibrant. Arclight Vel'Koz, very similar to Varus, who has much harder to see abilities overall from them being lighter and thus less vibrant. Masked Shaco, whose Q smoke animation is extremely difficult to see, especially from the Fog of War. Dark Valkyrie Diana, who has a much darker Q animation. Hired Gun Lucian, who has much harder to see colors on his abilities. Sad Robot Amumu, who has a Q animation that is much harder to see by being a lot dimmer and more gray. Creator Viktor, whose stun is a lot dimmer and can be easy to miss in teamfights. And Atlantean Syndra, who makes her skills harder to see by being a color extremely similar to the river and so a lot harder to notice overall. The next group of skins are those that have overly distracting particles. These skins make their skill shots harder to dodge because the particle effects are extremely distracting, and so it can be a lot harder to react to them and dodge properly. The skins that do this are as follows. Pool Party Ziggs, who has a very lopsided Q, and so it can be hard to judge how it bounces due to the animation. Surprise Party Amumu, who has an extremely distracting Q animation due to the wind-up. And Dragon Wing Corki, whose projectiles have a lot more particle effects and so are extremely distracting when they land and can help hide other animations for your team. The next group is skins that change the animations of their skill shots to be much thinner or generally smaller. Since these skins, of course, don't change the hitbox, having the animation be smaller can cause your opponent to underestimate how much room they need to dodge, since the animation is a lot less representative of the hitbox, and thus makes the skill shot a little bit harder to dodge. The skins that do this are as follows. Headhunter Nidalee, whose spears are super thin and fairly difficult to see. Battlecast Alpha Skarner, who has a much smaller Q radius and a thinner E. Popstar Ahri, who has a much thinner Q animation. Pool Party Mundo, who also has a much thinner Q animation. Pool Party Lulu, who once again has a thinner Q animation. Drake Shyvana, who has a much thinner E animation. Bear Cavalry Sejuani, who has a much thinner ultimate animation. Warrior Princess Sivir, who has a thinner Q animation. Giant Enemy Crab God, who has a much smaller and harder to see Q animation. Pool Party Lee Sin, who has a reasonably differently shaped and thinner Q animation. Death Blossom Elise, who has a thinner cocoon projectile. Pentakill Olaf, who has a thinner axe projectile. Pool Party Graves, who has a thinner Q animation. Forsaken Jace, who has a much thinner Q and EQ combo animation. And Battlecast Vel'Koz, who has a thinner ultimate and a reasonably distracting animation on his Q as well. The next group of skins improve the auto attack animations of the champion to be much smoother and thus tend to be a lot easier to CS with compared to other skins. The skins that do this are as follows. Bloodlord Vladimir, who has smoother auto attacks. Foxfire Ahri, who also has smoother auto attacks. And Mafia Graves, who has a more vibrant sound for auto attacks and a smoother animation. And the fifth and final group of skins that buff your champion are skins that give you a better indicator of some part of the champion's kit and thus are easier to understand what is going on with and often easier to use as a whole. The skins that do this are as follows. Arcade Sona, who makes it easier to see the debuffs she applies on enemies while also having a smaller ultimate width and smoother auto attacks overall. Woad Scout Quinn, who makes the dim passive indicator a lot brighter and easier to see. Pool Party Zac, who has a much clearer passive blob indicator. Pool Party Draven, who has a clearer axe indicator. Sandstorm Ekko, who has a much easier to see passive indicator. And that covers all of the skins that I found buff your champion. Hopefully I didn't miss too many, and if the list changes dramatically or if I missed a lot of champions, I'll be sure to make a part 2 of this video in the future. And that just about wraps it up. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to help support me, as well as you can check out some of my other videos on the screen too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.